Well, turned out to be a really nice day, and we appreciate you folks coming out to the aviation gathering. The idea for this is to try to get pilots together. When we set this up, the first one was 3 years ago. It was just to try to get people together to learn something. And it's hard for pilots to learn. The older we get, the less we want to be a student. But it turns out, as you'll see on this flight that I made out to Idaho, you learn something every flight you take. And sometimes the lessons you learn are painful, and sometimes they're not quite so painful. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The idea to go out to Johnson Creek came after watching on supercub.org people ranting and raving about what a great place it was to fly into. And I thought, I had some time last year. First of all, I grew up on a farm outside of Wichita, Kansas. And those of you who know Kansas know that that's like the most hilly part of Kansas, like right there. And this is the place I went for my first airplane ride. The farm I grew up on was near Wichita. And those of you who know Wichita, you have a few airplanes flying overhead all the time. And I remember watching them. My grandpa said, I told him I wanted to go for a ride in an airplane, and he goes, okay, well, someday. So one day he said, hey, Randy, we're going to go over to Jay Gear's place. Jay Gear was a farmer that ran this. He was one of the he was the member of Flying Farmers of America. And Jay was 82 years old, and he had a super cruiser. And he said, now listen, you cannot tell your mom that we did this. I said, okay, Grandpa. I was like 6 years old. So we went over there, and I got in the back of that super cruiser, and it was just a life-changing event. So I set out then to try to learn to fly, but my mom and dad said, nope, we're not going to let you learn how to fly. If you're going to do that when you get out of school, you can do it. So that's what I did. When I got to medical school, I ended up learning how to fly. And it really has changed things for me. I've been able to incorporate it with my medical practice. I fly a Cessna 210 out to Great Falls, Minot, Bismarck, Fargo, Duluth, Wausau, and Eau Claire, and see patients. And if they need the high-tech stuff, they come to the Twin Cities, to Maple Grove. So my area of medicine is reproductive endocrinology. I help people have babies or having trouble having babies, basically. So, and I do flight physicals too. I'm an aviation medical examiner, have been for maybe 15 years. I just do class 2 and class 3. And I'm not here to drum up business because I just do that to help pilots out. I got into this up in Park Rapids, Minnesota, because their AME retired. And the guys up there said, hey, would you go get certified by the FAA to do flight physicals? I said, okay. So I went and learned to spend a week to learn how to do flight physicals, and that's what led me to do them. And now I do them here in Maple Grove and up in Park Rapids. But one of the incentives, I think, that help us get started with this area in the Minnesota Pilots Association is to try to get more young people involved with aviation. And if you don't get a good enough nap during my talk today, you come back from a nap tomorrow afternoon, because I'm going to talk at noon tomorrow about some tricks we have for trying to stay old and fly longer. So there's the 210. And it's fast, and it goes really well. It has a TKS system on it, so I can fly in known ice. And in Minnesota, it comes out to be really useful for trying to get around in bad weather. But the real magic is that Super Cub. I fly it all year round, and it is really great flying. And I decided I wanted to go fly in the mountains. So several years ago, probably 15 years ago, I was getting ready to fly. I wanted to fly the Alaska Highway. And I knew nothing about flying the mountains, so I called up to Great Falls, so I was going to go see patients. I said, I want a flight instructor to teach me to fly in the mountains. And they go, we don't have any flight instructors out here to do that. I said, okay. They said, but there's a guy out here named Tuck Barrett. He knows a little bit about flying the mountains. He'll show you something. So it turned out Tuck Barrett was 79 years old when I met him. He came walking in, and Tuck Barrett flew a Cessna 210 for spotting forest fires for the Forest Service in the Bob Marshall Wilderness area and over Glacier National Park. And Tuck taught me how to fly an airplane. So I remember going up we did some ground school first, and he was teaching me some stuff and showing me some pictures, and he said, let's go fly. So I went out to Shodo, which is a small asphalt strip, but it was probably 2,500 feet long. And he said, let's do a landing over there. So I came in and I did a nice landing. And I pulled over the side and looked over to him, waiting for him to say, nice landing. He goes, that was pitiful. I go, okay. Because I think many of us flatlanders, we have a runway that's a mile wide and 2 miles long, and we fly too fast. We come in with too much airspeed because we're afraid that plane's going to fall out of the air. And he taught me how to use this airplane. So I learned a lot of things about flying in the mountains from him. And over the next 15 years, I got to know him really well. Became one of my best friends. Tuck taught me a lot of stuff, and so I wasn't really too frightened about going in the mountains, except with the Turbo 210, you can get out of trouble real fast. You know, you can really put that turbocharger and it'll really perform. But the Super Cub's a little bit different. This is Sparky Imus, and those of you who don't know about Sparky Imus, and he wrote a book called the Mountain Pilot Bible or something like that. Actually, there it is, Mountain Flying Bible. And it is a great book. But one of the things about my old bold pilot talk I'm going to give tomorrow is that, you know, there's a saying there's old pilots and bold pilots, but no old bold pilots. Tuck Barrett passed away when he was 92 years of age 5 years ago. And I became his aviation medical examiner because one day he went to get his flight physical and the doc out there said, Tuck, you're too old to fly. Don't even start with that exam. So Tuck called me up right away and said, Randy, I just failed my flight physical. He was almost in tears, and he was probably 86 then. I said, well, Tuck, tell you what, did you start filling out the paperwork? He said, he wouldn't even let me start filling out the paperwork. I said, he did you a favor. Because as you know, back in the paper days, you start filling out that form, you're on record. But he came out, passed his flight physical fair and square, and he knew when to stop flying. When he was about 91 years of age, he kept his airplane. He was not going to sell that airplane. And he polished it up, but he did a great job. But Sparky Imus, about 2 weeks after this, I gave a talk at the Montana Aviation Conference on survival medicine, and he flew his airplane into bad weather and bought the farm. So he broke some of the rules he wrote in that book. But you know what? I know that from my experience with medicine that I've written a couple of textbooks, but overall, some of the people that write textbooks are not the kind of people you want to have operating on you. It's a different deal, you know? So I prepared. There's a really nice flight guide out there for Idaho airstrips. I'd highly recommend it. It has a lot of good information about these airstrips. But Johnson Creek is a special one because it is beautiful. It has they manicure the runway. It's about 3,000 foot long, and it is a gorgeous airstrip. But they have a lot of rules for flying into this place because it's a canyon. Welcome to Johnson Creek, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, flying the mountains of Idaho is a serious, challenging endeavor, and the number of recent accidents attest to that fact. You need rock-solid skills in slow flight, airspeed, know your aircraft. Most of all, you'd have to have the proper attitude that is safe and conservative and professional. So that's the deal. So they put some pretty strong admonitions in there, and this is the Johnson Creek airstrip. You can see there's a house here. This house is elevated off the runway by about, I'd say, 200 feet. And it has an altitude of around 5,000 feet there at Johnson Creek. But you can see it's a long runway. But they have a nice thing from the Idaho Department of Transportation about how to get in there. They ask you to do some things like make sure you know about density altitude, because we don't really worry about it out here. But you do up in the mountains. Have survival gear with you, because as you'll see in a minute, we fly over some pretty rough terrain that's not like what we are used to around here. But basically, don't do this unless you have some solid background in mountain flying. Now, there's a lot of good flight instructors out there, and they go on to give a list of flight instructors you can go train with and learn how to do things safely in the mountains. They have arrival procedures. Make sure you call your position when you're coming in, because you can come in from the north or the south into this airstrip. Maintain 1,500 feet above till you come into a land. Announce your position 3 miles north of the airport. Report where you're at. And it's really important because there can be a lot of airplanes. There's 164 airplanes flew into there on the same day, weekend that I was there, which is part of the problem. It's too congested. And they just want you to not land downstream to the north on this runway. From the south, the same deal. So anyway, here's the pattern you're supposed to come in. If you're coming in from the north, you come in, you circle the airfield, you come on a downwind, turn base, and there's quite a sloping terrain here. So they have an abort procedure of what to do if you're not going to land. Make sure you pick out the path, the point that you're going to make a go, no-go decision, which is about 1/3 of the way down the runway. If you don't think you're going to get down 1/3 down the runway, go around. Come around, try it again. Nothing wrong with doing that. Pick a point, land on it. So one of the piece of advice I would give to folks here is that we do get sloppy because we have beautiful runways in Minnesota. Go out and practice on some grass strips where you put something down on the grass and spot landings. Control your airspeed, because it becomes real important for some of these airstrips up there because some of them are not very long. Here's the abort procedure. You come in, if you see you're not going to make it 1/3 of the way down the runway, you go around, you have time to climb up over the Bryant's home. The Bryants are actually the ones that donated this airport to the state. And how to depart. Don't depart on runway 17, no matter what the wind is doing, because the terrain rises quickly and you'll end up in the Bryant's living room, which you don't want to do. So they just point out a bunch of things. So some things about this is, we don't see these about our airports in Minnesota because our airports are pretty easy to do. But out in Idaho, Montana, not quite so much. And you can see this is a plane that almost bought the farm coming into the Bryant's home. They took off in the direction toward the south because the wind was coming out of the south. And this airplane almost crashed. It landed and it was damaged because it hit some of these trees. But they made it down okay. So I put on I have a survival vest that I wear when I go flying in bad areas, and I'm not going to go through the details of what I put in this because everybody has their own things they want to put in it, but just make sure you have it on you and not sitting in the back seat or another part of the aircraft. You want to have it so if you go down, you can really get to it quickly. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So here's my hangar over here at Anoka Airport, across the way. Have the Super Cub tucked in the back corner, the 210. And when I went ready to go, I took the 210 up to have some avionics work done up at Park Rapids. Had this sitting right smack in the middle. Filled it up with fuel on Thursday night. Topped off because I was leaving the following Wednesday. And my hangar's like right over here. And so I went out and needed to change the oil in the airplane. Just before I went. So on the following Monday, I went out, flew one lap around just to get the oil warmed up so I could drain it out nicely. So I drained the oil, came back in, taxied it up here, and when I was doing my post-flight exam, I noticed that my nose bowl on that Super Cub was loose. And you know that carburetor is cantilevered on the front of that thing, so it's a bad design. So I called up Daryl Bulldock right away and said, hey, could you come over and take a look at this? And they came over that day and overhauled the carburetor, fixed it up. That was on a Tuesday night. And he said, hey, come on over and test fly it one time. I just want to make sure everything's okay. So I did. Got in the airplane, flew around the pattern, flew great, put it back in, got ready to go the next day. And had my big tires on. And this is Tim and Al from over at Bulldogs looking at my airplane. So I go out here, load it up. Let me just show you something about this airplane. Oh shoot. I have a cargo pod on this thing. And on that cargo pod, you could stuff some bodies in that thing, which is really useful. When I got married, things I don't need to say any more. So what you used to be able to carry in your airplane to support your life was not going to work anymore. So that worked out pretty well, and I had it loaded up. So off I went, took off, Came out and taxied out to runway 36. Neil Odie was up in the tower, and I gave it full power and took off and had on the left tank, and I got about 50, 60 feet up in the air, and the engine quit, deader than a doornail. I was loaded up, and I dead sticked it in, and there's my cargo pod. Here's the hangars in. I did a complete pre-flight of it, checked my fuel gauges, full of gas, and I ended up making it, pulled off onto this taxiway. And immediately I told Neil, I said, got a problem. Put the nose down. One of the things I took home from that was I've done power off stalls a lot with flight instructors and on my own to stay current with it. A dead stick is a whole different airplane than a propeller that is just turning back to idle. And I was impressed with how much nose down I needed to give it to keep that thing in the air. So I put the nose down. I didn't have time to flip it from the left to the right tank because I had one of those, you know, you either left or right tank. There's not a both in my Super Cub. And I came over the side here and flipped it to the right tank, did a restart, started right up. I thought, man, I was shaking at that point. I'd come back to my hangar. Knew what dead stick was about. Went back to my hangar and checked it, and when I went back to my left tank, the engine died right away. Went back to my right tank, it ran. So I called Daryl right away and said, Daryl, something's wrong, and could you take a look at it? So I go over there, and Tim came out, and we looked at the carburetor. Nothing was wrong. Tim gets up on that tire, looks in the fuel tank, said, Randy, this tank is dry. I go, no way. He said, it's dry as a bone. Crawled up on this one, looked in, there was just a little bit in the bottom of that tank. My floor of my hangar is epoxied, so if you have fuel leak, you're going to see it, especially if you're going to dump out 30-some gallons of gas on the bottom. I'd only flown it for maybe a total of 15 minutes. But something that I learned from this was something about physics, refraction of light. This is a full tanks. But look at this. Piper put these lines back behind there because up here where there's air, see the line is not refracted. But down here, it's crooked. So that's something you can use as a tip because when those tanks are clear full or clear empty, you can't tell the difference from looking at those sight gauges. So while I thought I was taking off with an aircraft that was full of fuel, I was sitting there with an aircraft that was dead empty. Had no way of knowing it unless I would have got up on that tire and looked inside that tank. But I knew it's my hangar. I'm the only one in there. What's the deal? Daryl Starr has an aircraft right across from me. He has a Super Cub. And he has this new sight gauge. See, it's a new modern one that does not have, the back is not open. He can't use that trick. So one trick for those of you who have sight gauges, you got to be careful about what you see there, and you can use those little markings as a trick. So that's just one. That was the first part of my lesson learning. On my 210, I have one of those sticks where I calibrate. I know exactly how much fuel I have on board. I check it whenever I'm going to make a critical flight when I know I'm not full of gas. My wife says I'm always full of gas. So the trick was to go out here to 9 Uniform 2. So my plan was to go across South Dakota, which I did. My first landing stop was over here in Aberdeen. Aberdeen Airport is a beautiful airport. It's got a lot of grass, and for those of you who have big tires in your airplane, you know that when you land on asphalt, especially when you turn on them, it just chews them up. And they're not cheap tires. So you try to land on grass wherever you can. Well, I got out to Johnson Creek and found out somebody landed there on the way out there from the Anoka Airport area. And they got in major trouble with the airport manager because they landed on the grass along the side of the runway. And they got written up by the FAA for it. Yep. And so they got out of it because they explained there's not NOTAM that you can't land in the grass. And I think that one of the take-home messages here, you just need to make sure legally you're going to win it by landing on the grass, but why go through the hassle? So just call the airport in advance and find out from the locals, is it okay to land in the grass or not? So that was another lesson learned. Took on off and out here, and my next objective was to make it out to Baker, Montana. To make it to Baker, Montana, wanted to land there because there's a guy named Roger Meggers there who does a beautiful job restoring Super Cubs. And a super nice person. As we have a lot of those in aviation, which we're so blessed to have that. Which makes it a nice thing to come to a conference when you have like this as opposed to going to a medical conference. This is to do this any day. But look at this. You're flying through these MOAs. This is a high one. This is a low one. In the Powder River low MOA, protected airspace is between 500 feet of AGL up to 12,000 feet. That's a lot of airspace. And Roger is being a champion of trying to get that thing changed because of the fact that, you know, we're all going to have ADS-B. Guess what? The military does not have ADS-B in their aircraft. So the thought that they have something on their aircraft that's going to tell them where we are is not true. So you got to be really careful when you penetrate into these airspaces because of the fact that you can get run over really fast. So something I really didn't really understand until I met with Roger, and he was still pissed off about the fact they put that MOA out there to 500 feet. So just be careful when you're going out that kind of airspace to know what you're dealing with. And these are not little slow airplanes that they're flying out there. B-1 bombers and flying low altitudes. They let you, if you're within 3 nautical miles of the airport, they let you go up to 2,000 feet. Isn't that nice? But otherwise, you got to be careful. So there's Roger. He had his Super Cub here last year for the AOPA thing. This was Super Cub #1. So he found it, restored it, did a beautiful job, and you cannot find a more quality person than he and his family. He's got twin a little boy and a little girl, grandkids. So I was there with Roger, and he came around the back of it, and he looked, and he said, "Hey, your ELT antenna's broken off." I go, "What?" And I went back there and looked, and I had not seen it in my pre-flight. So I go back and look, and here's the configuration of how my Super Cub was sitting in the hangar during that time when it was by itself. Have a garage door in the back, so when it's raining or snowing, I can pull my car inside. My current thought is that somebody came into my hangar, they were able to get into the back door with the garage door. They opened it up, they drug a hose across the back of my Super Cub, broke my ELT antenna off, sucked the fuel out of my tanks, drained it all the way on one side as much as they get. They left just a little bit on the one side. And my error here was I did not do an adequate pre-flight. I should have crawled up on that blasted tire and looked inside to see how much fuel did I have. But I trusted the fact that there was a secure hangar. I wasn't going to have to worry about that. So that was a tough lesson learned, and I didn't like it because of the fact that I trust people out here, and I just didn't think that would happen. But it happened, and just a word to the wise. You got to do a complete pre-flight. Make sure you check out your fuel tanks before you go. So then I left from Baker out to Bozeman to spend the night with Mike Vivian and his wife and flew along some beautiful countryside. This is the Yellowstone River. These are the crazy mountains outside of Livingston. There's the Livingston Airport, and you can't see this very well here, but you can see from above. Look at all the different crossway runways here, grass. That's because the wind blows there hard. It's not a small wind. It's like 50 to 60 knots routinely because of the way the mountains funnel the air through there. It's really turbulent, and you need it. Then I took off from there to go to the Bozeman Airport. Came into Bozeman, and it's a really nice airport. It's up at about 4,500 feet. And I noticed when I took off out of Bozeman, I just didn't have the umph. I just felt something wasn't quite right with my Super Cub. I wasn't sure what it was. And at that point, I was spooked because I'd already had the fuel problem, and I'm going, what is going on here? And I zigzagged down around, and one of the things you learn to do is to follow highways if you possibly can, because you always got a good place to coast onto. But you don't have to fly over the mountains. You just fly around them, and it's really nice and safe to do that. And Tuck taught me how to do that. You fly You know, you ever fly on the right side of a canyon, you don't fly down the middle. So you can have always leave yourself an out, always have a turn left to going to lower altitude. Wanted to go to Salmon, Idaho for fuel. So here's a typical canyon as I was flying along, and if I was going to be down in it, I would stay on the right side so I'd have plenty of room to turn. Now, one of the things about doing canyon turns is, and Tuck showed me this on the first day I met him, he had showed a picture of a Bonanza that was smashed on the side, and he said this guy got into a canyon, he wanted to do a turn, so he got nervous. So what did you do? You give it full power. You power out of the turn. Well, what does that do to your turn radius? Major increase. So if you're going to do a quick turn, the trick is to slow your airplane down. How do you slow your airplane down? You gain altitude, for God's sake. You pull back on the stick, you climb up a little bit. That gives you a little more power, a little room to land the airplane, and then you can execute your turn. I like to have some sort of a tracking device on board. So I have a DeLorme tracking device, but there's several different kinds out there. And the mountains are beautiful, you know, just gorgeous. But it starts, you know, that joke about when you fly over water, the bad engine thing starts to go on. Same way over the mountains, your sphincter is a little tighter when you're going over the mountains. Came into the airport in Salmon, and it's a beautiful airport, and it's no problem. It had a north-south runway, but I noticed when I was taking off out there, it was doggy again. Why? What was my problem? Density, altitude. What else? You got to lean your engine out. So you're up at a high altitude, the air is thinner, you got to lean the engine out. So I heard somebody on the radio, somebody else was having trouble, and the guy said, lean your engine out. And I'm going, oh, geez, what a dummy. So I leaned it out, and man, I just got all sorts of power out of that Super Cub. So here's Johnson Creek, here was Salmon, and I elected to kind of go around different angles to stay at some lower altitudes to give myself an out in case I need to go down, but it's not the kind of terrain that you really want to land in if you can help it. Came into Johnson Creek Airport from the north. So the procedure is to come along, hug the mountainside over here, crosswind, downwind, come back in to land. There's the pattern. And it's a pretty wide canyon, but the walls are pretty steep here on the north end of it. On the side here, you're making your downwind turn. So when you're making your downwind turn and you're descending right over the treetops. Your boarded procedure was to come pick a third of the way down. If you don't think you're going to get it down, give full power, clean up the airplane, climb. So there it is. Bill Rusk, some of you know him, but Bill Rusk gave a talk here at our first event. And you may recall that Bill Rusk built a Super Cub, put it on straight floats, and he's going to fly it to Alaska. That was his dream. Bill Rusk is a Southwest airline captain, former F-16 fighter pilot. He is a tremendous aviator. And he gave a talk here about something that happened with him when he hit a submerged item in his Super Cub, and he darn near lost his life. His talk was in here. We didn't record it, unfortunately, but it was quite a gripping story. And those of you who are here, did anybody hear that talk? Okay, good. You'll never hear it again. Because he told me, I told you I'd give that talk one time. And that's it. So that's part of his past, which I certainly respect that. But boy, that was quite a learning experience, wasn't it, to hear what Bill went through. So I landed the airplane, and it is a wonderful group. 164 airplanes came in there, which is way too many. It was, as they say, a cluster waiting to happen. A lot of airplanes. This is aiming to the north. You can see the terrain over here. So when you're coming in, you're right over the treetops. You turn your base leg, come on in. So a lot of camaraderie. The bad thing about this is these people are here in the evening doing this, but at daytime they're sitting along the side of the runway watching how bad of a landing you're going to make. So you knew you had a crowd when you came in to land. And it's just a great group of people. Beautiful weather, beautiful terrain. There's nothing like aviation people. That's where we went to get beer and where we get to get internet. So that's the only place around there where you can use your cell phone. And we just had a bunch of Super Cub people, and this guy's a complete jokester, so there he goes. He's just waiting for his moment. There's Bill Rusk. This is Bill. I took a picture of him over at New Richmond, just as he was taking off that morning to go on his flight up to Alaska. And you can look where his safety vest is. His safety vest was sitting on the back of his seat. So when he hit the submerged log, flipped his airplane over immediately, he had no safety vest with him. He had his cell phone in his pocket. There he is taking off that morning. And it was 2 days later where he had his accident that almost lost his life. So Bill has rebuilt another Super Cub, a Javelin, and he just flew this up to Alaska last week. He finally got to make his trip. And but he wears his vest when he gets in that airplane now. And he was on the cover of Lake Country Journal magazine, the current issue. So beautiful picture. Brad Thornburg took that of him. Bill's airplane sitting right there. So the day I got there, it was kind of subdued, and somebody had an airplane crash there that same morning. A pacer came in, 300 pounds over gross, and came down the runway. They were watching him, decided that he couldn't make it, didn't clean the flaps up, gave it full power, tried to board it here, stalled the airplane out, went right over Bill's airplane. Didn't follow the abort procedure. They lived. Yep, they lived, but they were badly damaged. There's Bill's airplane. There's the wing, right over the wing of Bill's airplane. So those of you who know Bill Rusk, this guy is the epitome of a perfectionist. And here he had bad luck. He almost had bad luck twice. I was going to stay away from Bill Rusk the rest of my life. But he came through it. He did great with it. There they are helicoptering their mouth. You can see the Bryant home, how high it is there. You just have to be careful. So you just follow the rules, you know. Turned out, the word is that the pilot who had this happen to him had an accident a year before where he was going into McCall and he ran out of gas about a mile short of the runway. Yep. So we decided to go out, and I begged Bill to take me out with two of his buddies to fly in some of these mountain strips. And so Johnson Creek's here. We hit Indian Creek, Thomas Creek, Mahoney Creek, Lower Loon, and Upper Loon. Lower Loon is 800 feet long. That's a fun one, isn't it? It is. You've been there. Okay, good deal, Dan. Oh, you did? Okay. So here's Indian Creek, and it's a nice long airstrip. And of course, what do you do when you go out there? You have to go out and mark your territory, of course. We'd already loaded up with coffee that morning, so we marked our territory. Dan Lilja and Kristen Sturm, both of them from Idaho and Montana. And then we went to our next one, which is Thomas Creek. They have beautiful, well-maintained forest strips out there. Here the guys are coming into land. Steep terrain on the side, so again, you just have to practice your airspeeds to make sure you got your airspeeds nailed down. Then we went to Mahoney Creek, which is over here. So here's the three airplanes ahead of me. So I let them go ahead of me, and I came in and followed them, which makes it easy for first-timers. So my advice to you is if you're going to go out there and land on these strips, go with somebody that knows what they're doing. They've done it before. Because then all you got to do is follow them. It makes it really easy to do and safe, but I would never try these strips on my own without somebody with me. So here you come into Mahoney Creek. There you come in on final. And it's just an awesome experience. Then we went to Lower Loon, and you can see if you lose an engine in here, I was really thanking Daryl Bulldog for having a smooth running engine at that point in time. Here's the aircraft coming in. And it's just just gorgeous country. We're going over there to have breakfast. This is going to Lower Loon. Lower Loon. There's Lower Loon Airstrip right there. One way in, one way out. There's a river that runs here that's cool. And so as you're coming in, and you're coming in on turning kind of bases, you're following this thing along, you hit a sink and it drops. And the terrain is not conducive to a smooth landing there on the end of the runway. So you have to have your airspeeds really nailed to come in. There's the airplanes landed. There's where you go eat breakfast. There we are. This gorgeous country. There we are. Dan Lilja is famous because Lilja, his company makes the rifle barrels that the Navy SEALs use and that the most of the Olympic biathletes use. He's in Montana. There we go up to eat. They shoot their own horses up there. Then we walk back, and I put this, it's a nice picture because here's two folks that love aviation, enjoying the outdoors. It's just quite a fraternity of brothers and sisters that we have in aviation. And then we take off, and you have to make sure you make a right turn relatively soon, have your airspeeds under control. Then off we went then to Lower Loon, or to Upper Loon. Is that me? That's not me, good deal. And there we go into Upper Loon. There's the airstrip. There's the planes on final. There we go. There's Bill's airplane. There I was getting pictures of Bill's airplane. This beautiful countryside. The dust taken off in these strips was quite a deal. You had to make sure that they gave them plenty of time to get away because it was like IFR right after they took. You had to make sure they got cleared. That was the airstrip from above. And then back to Johnson Creek. This is coming from the south entrance. So you came in, entered the downwind. There's Johnson Creek. You can see the sides of the mountains we had to hug. And in you go. Just way too many airplanes. It's not busy like this the rest of the year. Like there may be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 airplanes there, but nothing quite like this. So it really is not the great time. Then we took off, and my wife was smart enough not to fly with me out there. So she went commercial, and we met up in Park City, Utah, flew the Super Cubs down there, and we went out and enjoyed the mountains and went up to the Tetons. There's Steve with his Super Cub. He's an Oklahoman. There we are. Beautiful pictures. I didn't take them, but that's them. And there's Johnson Creek. So I want to put this talk together just to kind of let you know that it's just fine to go out there and test your waters. Just make sure before you go, if you can, to go out there and spend a day or two with some flight instructors that know how to fly in the mountains and practice your short field takeoff and landings here. Put a spot down on the grass strip. You know, my favorite one here is, what's the one up here? Just Forest Lake. Forest Lake. Beautiful grass strip and really great people. I've heard they're going to pave over that thing. Yeah. I think that's true. That's going to make me cry. But they're going to leave grass along the side, I heard. But at any rate, one of the things we're trying to promote through the Minnesota Pod Association is keep grass strips open. We need all the grass strips we can possibly have. And that's it. Anybody have any comments or questions? Or actually, yes, sir.
What pressure do you run in your tires?
I ran, I think, 8 pounds in those, yep. But you know, almost all these strips, you would need big tires. And I had some advice. Dan?
Johnson Creek, they fly bonanzas.
Yeah. But the other ones, like Lower Loon, you got to have I think little tires would work on that probably too.
I had 850 tires on a Scout and it was fine.
Yeah.
Just a couple of them were kind of rough, but
Yep.
it was fine. 850 tires and a regular 3200 tail. I
Yep.
wouldn't put a no-bill airplane in there.
No. Lower Loon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Johnson Creek had a lot of big airplanes coming in there.
Creek or some of those places
Yep.
got huge ground.
Well, it's definitely doable. Really encourage you to go out there and test your limits and see how. Yes, sir.
What was the smallest engine you've seen go in there, the Johnson Creek?
There was a J3 Cub came in there just fine.
With a,
By himself.
Yeah, by himself.
yeah, with a 65.
I think he had a 65. Yeah. Yeah. It took,
Elevation of Johnson Creek.
I think it's right around 5,000, 5,500 feet.
The
Yep.
problem is you got to out-climb higher terrain to get out.
Yeah. But it's a pretty wide canyon, you know, you could do some circling to get out of it, but I wouldn't do it in a J3, but I think if you have I have 160 horsepower in mine, and 150 horsepower is making it without any trouble.
And don't do it in the middle of the day.
Right, another one is don't do it in the middle of the day. Morning is the best time to fly in the mountains. It gets really bumpy and hot. Density altitude is a real problem in the afternoons.
When I was out there, yeah, we started flying at 6 in the morning, but done by because one day we forgot we were at Flying Bee Ranch having lunch and kind of forgot the time, and the next thing I know it was 12:30 and we're trying to get out. It was 90 degrees down in that canyon. And that was in June.
Yep. That's the deal. Yes, sir.
Can you talk just a little bit about one-way runways and downwind takeoffs?
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind about in your pilot operating handbook for your Cessna 172 or your whatever you're flying, when you see what their performance numbers are, it's really important to note that those are on flat terrain, and they tell you what you need to add if you have a tailwind and what kind of an incline to add if you're going to have an incline. And again, it's nice to go with somebody that knows that they've done that before. Because I knew if I saw those three guys get in there, I had a 50-50 chance of making it in myself. Then I could always give it, you know, if it looked bad, I was go around. So that guy that had the mistake. You know, it wasn't his first time having a problem, and he flew over Gross, and he came in in the afternoon, I believe, and it was you can kind of make your own luck, you know. I think so. Going up with an instructor, getting some checkout with that just would save a lot of grief. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, I've gone there twice, and I flew both times with local pilots that knew it and all that, and we never flew at more than half gas in a 180 horse Scout.
Okay.
3-blade prop, and it was fine with that, but you put full fuel in it.
Yeah.
It was a different story.
You know, and flying with a smaller group is good. We had 4 planes in our group, and that was perfect. But if you take off with 6 to 10 planes, man, that would be just really asking for trouble.
Well, on some of these strips, there's no parking.
Yeah, good point. Okay, go enjoy the day. Thank you for coming out, and come back tomorrow if you can.